Hi, it's Christy of So to Speak, and welcome back to the Closet series. Our next guest in the closet is Hope Timberlake. Hope is a speaker coach. And before you jump to thinking that Hope is a speaker coach for the stereotypical public speaking of jumping on a stage in front of hundreds or thousands of people, think again. Hope has been there and done that. And she has decided to shift her focus to helping communications within leadership so that she can help leaders communicate effectively every day. She specifically focuses on women and underrepresented populations within leadership. And we're lucky enough to have her in the closet to demystify all of our fears of public speaking. And the thing I love about Hope is that she is witty and wise, and she brings humor to communicating and speaking up. And speaking of, her book, Speak Up, Dammit, Quiet Your Fears, Polish Your Presence, and Share Your Voice, is coming out October of this year. She's going to give us an inside scoop about that. And she also shares such great relatable insights that makes you, dare I say, actually anticipate the next time that you are given the chance to speak up. Hope and I would love if you shared in the comments some of the takeaways. What are some of the strategies that we share that you're going to put to use the minute that you finish listening to our conversation? Put them in the comments below. But first, please sit back, relax, and enjoy our conversation. So excited that you said yes to be on the series. I was connected with our fellow friend Lori Hotler from the Careering podcast and listened to your conversation, and just what immediately drew me to you was that you spoke very similar to my philosophy. So of course I was like, ding, ding, ding. It was so not a prescribed how to speak. There was no like major technique. It was so grounded. It was so accessible. You were so relatable. So is that something you've always been, has that always been your approach, or did you learn that? Like, how did that come to be?
No, in fact, if anything, it's always been my approach. And I think that's been my approach from a child, and my dad's very much like that. He is the consummate business owner slash salesman, and he just adapts, and it's not chameleon in design or strategy. It's just more like he loves people and he recognizes what people need, and he's incredibly accessible. So I think there was something that's either ingrained or modeled for me. But then I felt like I had to learn more of the philosophy, or get more trained in what to do. And funny, I've kind of come full circle, and now I just do what I know is right. And I adapt to where people are. I find it so frustrating when things are prescriptive. And I've worked for, I'm not going to name, but I've worked for firms that are very prescriptive. And I do get and I've also helped like TED Talk speakers and things of that nature. And I do get, especially in the early days, when there was, and there still is, a version of the right way to do it, but it drives me crazy. And I've pivoted a lot from working with speakers on stage to people who are just to communicate effectively day to day. Like, that's the special sauce for me. I feel like that's so interesting and so important, because how much of our time is spent on stage? Even if you're a professional speaker, you're still spending more time communicating off stage. And I just want to see and have people just be able to be more effective and feel like they have better connections with each other. And that doesn't mean one thing. It might be that, okay, one person needs to be warmer and less abrasive, if you will, and another person needs to be stronger and really clear and assertive. So I'd rather just see where they are and just kind of move them towards where they should be. And it's very much like you, Christy. I mean, you know this. And it's just fun because there's so many different ways of communicating and coaching that we all have our like little differences. But that definitely, in this day and age today, after however many years of doing this work, I want people to be better communicators every day.
So you said a few things that I want to just hold with for a second. So one thing you said, which I would just love to know how your own authentic style of coaching comes into play here. So you had said, sometimes people need to be less abrasive, or a specific person maybe needs to project or speak up or find their voice a little bit more. Is that and it may not be one or the other, so I don't mean to make it so black and white, but is it something you intuitively see that maybe someone doesn't come to you for, or are they coming to you for that and you say, okay, you're coming to me for that, makes sense? Like, do you share with them if they don't come to you to be less abrasive and they just want to speak up more? How do you interweave that in a way?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I think a lot of it at this stage is intuitive, as you have experienced. You see someone or you're communicating with someone, and many times they're coming for a different reason. So they will come because, I don't know, maybe they're not feeling confident, or maybe they're not getting the promotion, or there's something happening they got in their review that they need to work on their communication skills, which always cracks me up. I had one yesterday and I was like, okay, great. We need to work on your communication skills. What does that mean? There are so many ways of defining that. And I asked this particular person what it meant, and she had one answer. Within 10 minutes, I had an entirely different answer of what it meant. And so it's leading them to be like, okay, well, when we ask what communication means, and it took you 10 minutes and you gave me 55 different examples, could being concise be something you want to work on? And I didn't say it that way, but I led her to the point of, oh, is that the kind of explanation you would give in a meeting? Is that how you would problem solve? All right. So what's the environment like? Do people nod off? Are they not multitasking? How are they responding to you? You're too flippin' long-winded. Shut up. Not exactly what I said to her, but yes, I think very much they, and all of us, Christy, I think you and I too, we have different perceptions of how we come across than other people see us.
Mhm.
And it's so hard for us to see ourselves clearly. And we're professionals in this. So for people who aren't, it's even harder. And so they can tell me whatever it is they want to work on, and we will work on that. But usually, whatever problems they identify are either not problems at all, or secondary to something else that needs to
Right.
be focused
That's
on.
underneath it. So, oh, I love that. Wait, that was hilarious, by the way. Um, I was laughing because I can be incredibly verbose. Anybody like I have to get there and just kind of go, oh, okay, here we are. Okay.
But that's what's good about these kinds of things, is we're allowed to be verbose now. It's
Yes.
not like
Yeah,
someone's like, okay, we need a decision on this budget, and then you pontificate for 25 minutes about
exactly.
whatever else.
And
So
don't
this
you
is the
feel
environment.
this is total, so what you're saying is so don't you feel, and I would love like you to push back on this. I always tell clients to start low stakes, right? I'm like, don't start with the board meeting or presenting, the financial report. Start you that might be part of your job, but don't wait 6 months from now. Like, go to the grocery store when you're in the elevator with someone. Like, you might not usually start conversation. You have nothing to lose. You're never going to see this person again. You're going to see them for like maybe 3 floors. Like, what is your thought on that?
100%. I'm not going to push back. I'd love to, but I can't. Although I like the idea, the elevator and all this, pre-COVID, I'm always saying, even at the dinner table, sure, those people, you're comfortable with them, but actually that's a great opportunity for you to try something new. So
Yes.
if you are that verbose person, and maybe you and I are, and maybe some of our clients are, what is it like to add some pauses? So you say the headline and you pause and see what the reaction is. And how are you able to withhold yourself from over explaining or continuing to explain? And so like that's the perfect playground for figuring out what you want to do and what you should be doing. Because if you can't do it at the dinner table, you're really not going to be able to do it at the boardroom, in the boardroom.
Right. Well, in that safe space, right? And so, oh, it reminds me of, I'm just highlighting this again. I said it when I was promoting your segment on LinkedIn. I loved your YouTube post-it
Yeah.
pause.
Yeah.
It was so, it's also because so many times people don't know, especially beginning speakers, don't know what to do with their hands. So even getting used to there's something very comforting about having something in your hands while you're practicing,
Yeah.
and you nailed the silence. It could be so uncomfortable. So when you were saying over explaining, I would love for you to speak to the importance of emotional intelligence with presenting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so key and hard for us to do. I think all of us sit in our rooms and at our desk, and we want to craft the message or the data or the slides or the analysis or whatever it is, and we don't spend the time to think about how is this information going to land on them? How do I need to look for their reaction? I think one of the most underutilized skills or underutilized tactics in communication is asking powerful questions. So if I say the headline, if I say this bottom line of what I want to share, of like, it's important that our team go back to work this summer. Pause. I'm like, what would that mean for the new parents in the organization? Or who do you think would be excited about that idea versus who might be distressed about going back to work in the office? And so whatever it may be, but like coming up with important questions that are, yes, confirming that they understand, collecting their input, but also sort of furthering this conversation more. So it's a conversation, it's not a presentation.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Like you are so, I consistently say, because of the theater background, I always say it's a dialogue, not a monologue, like over and over. And that's so spot on what you're saying about the energy out. So it's so easy for us to forget that. And so oftentimes people are like, well, what if I can't see the person or what? And it's the idea of putting your energy out. So can you just expand on that, how that can help maybe with grounding and maybe even an anti-anxiety method too?
Exactly. I think it's the biggest, I think that's the number one anti-anxiety is when part of what happens when we're nervous, we're evaluating ourselves. We're being critical. We've got all of these thoughts floating in our brain. I say this often. I talk about how there's studies that show we're thinking 4,000 words a minute. So that's just a lot of thoughts ping-ponging. And when we're under stress, almost all of those 4,000 words are critical. Mm-hmm. And stress could be low grade stress. It could be like I'm talking to my manager and she kind of intimidates me. It doesn't have to be that I'm up on a huge stage. Mm-hmm. And so now we've got all this negativity coming into our brain. If we're able to turn that energy around and use some of those 4,000 words to think, oh, I wonder how this is going to land. I wonder how this person's going to use this. I wonder what questions they'll have. I wonder if this is something that they can implement today, tomorrow, next week, whatever it is. Or I wonder where they're sitting. I mean, you get like really granular, like, oh, I wonder what their home office looks like. Wonder if they're drinking tea or coffee, whatever, but just getting into their headspace, focusing on them. And then something else you said, which I think is so important around the energy. This is not my tip, but I've adopted it. I heard this on a podcast about 6 months ago. I thought it was brilliant that when you're in a virtual environment, you need to double the energy that you give out. And what that means, like, so for example, if I'm talking in a work setting and it's a team of 3 people, I will see videos. People send me videos so that I can analyze. And some of them are like, yeah, so I think for the budget and that line item, we need to do this. Okay, not only do you need to take it professionally and like sit up, but double your energy. It's 3 people on that call. Make it 6. Like act like you're talking to 6 people. Double your flipping energy. And even though everyone's like, well, I'm so tired because I'm on Zooms all day. Part of why you're so tired is like this like flatlining of inertia. Like if you put yourself out there and you get excited about your ideas and you put double the energy that you think you need to do, you're actually going to be more fulfilled at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
And you might be tired, but different tired. You're not going to be like that flatline tired.
Yes, it's more of a fulfilled tired, if that makes sense, that regenerative. So everything I'm hearing you say, I just wrote a few things down that I was like, oh my gosh, we've had so for people listening or watching, we've had so many Kismet moments like, oh, of course. And by the way, you posted something with your outdoor furniture and we have almost the exact same outdoor furniture. Just keeps happening. But our philosophies are so similar. So it's definitely, you're preaching to the choir, but in such a beautiful way that I think most people don't look at from that. And you bring so much humor, which if we can keep bringing that humor in a very encouraging way, obviously, and not a critical way, it allows us not to take ourselves as seriously. And you said 2 things. So I want to circle back because I feel like I shifted a little bit. when you were talking about someone over explaining, and I went to emotional intelligence, it's because what you brought up just now again is that sense of self-awareness. So oftentimes when we're over explaining, it's because we're not present, right? So we're not self-aware. And then you just brought it again, sitting back or being tired. If people become more self-aware of what they need to boost their energy, do they need to shake out? Do they need to ground down? Do they need to eat something? What do they like? What types of food do they need to eat? And just start paying attention. Can you speak specifically to self-awareness and how that benefits speakers?
Yes. I mean, I love your tips that you're saying too, like thinking about what brings you energy and what you're referring to with the shake it out. People do this. I don't know that everyone knows this, but when you're nervous and you've got all this frenetic energy, but sometimes you need to like channel it forward to the audience, to your listeners. So you just need to shake out that excess energy and it kind of pumps you up and it focuses you. And that's an interesting and helpful tip. I've done it before. If you're like a leg shaker or, a hand shaker, sometimes that's a good way to get it out. But also just paying attention, like you said, what helps me? I get super thirsty. And so I always have to have water next to me 100% of the time because there's nothing more distracting than you're going through a presentation or a workshop or a conversation and you're halfway through and you're like, I'm parched. I'm parched. Oh my God. And now that's all you can think about is your flipping thirst. So knowing yourself is so important and knowing what you need. And then like a little more nerdy version of that, I do this exercise at the end that I'll send to clients that I ask them to keep a little chart of their wins, their learns, and their changes. It's a little spreadsheet that I mean, I don't know if any of your listeners want it. It's pretty basic that I can send out, but it's just an Excel spreadsheet about your wins, your learns, and your changes. And I talk about how the wins are like, yay, what went well? And this could be everything from like, I felt good. Like I slept well that night before, or I had my water next to me, or more around, I asked the questions, they responded, they became really engaged. Anything, small, big, the win could be, I proposed the budget, they said yes. So it doesn't have to be that. It could be the small thing of like, I had my pen nearby, so I didn't have to run around the room to find it, whatever it is. Then the learn is something that you didn't know or didn't expect that surprised you. And again, it could be a small thing like, oh, I realized I really should have a pen nearby because Christy says all these cool things and I want to write it down. So I remember to circle back to it. Or, okay, I learned that I don't need to spend 10 minutes explaining. I should have created a conversation earlier. So whatever it may be. And then the change is obviously what you do different next time. Like if I when I can redo it, but I love that the practice of writing it into some kind of spreadsheet or some kind of documentation where you can go back and be like, oh, right, before the next thing I do, I should do it. It's not like you have to log your wins, learns, and changes from your dinner table, but for any of your meetings, even if they're low stakes, people think they have to do it for like the biggest meeting, the board meeting. No, do it for your team meeting, do it for your customer meeting, do it for your one-on-one with your manager and see, are there themes? Okay, so I noticed that I say all the time and I heard it and it's true, not just in the board meeting, it was true with my manager. Things will arise that you just may not have taken stock for or never recorded.
The thing I love so much about the simplicity of the spreadsheet, or I mean, you could get like a legal pad and just
Totally.
2, 3 columns and is it reminds you, but it shows you how much you've grown. Like you can go back and you can say, oh my gosh, I've made so much progress because we're so easy. I have to remind clients all the time, like, can we pause and celebrate what
Yes.
just happened? Like you're breezing past this right now, but 6 months ago, do you feel like you would have been able to do that? And they're like, oh, and I'm like, we have to reflect on that. Because if we breeze past the celebrations.
I could not agree more. Earlier, you talked about humor. Humor and celebrations are so needed right now, especially. But we were both preaching this, I'm sure, 18 months ago, 2 years ago, and we don't see enough of it. I think people take themselves so seriously and they get so intense or they get hard on themselves. And so being able to track, okay, yeah, I've been improving. And communication is not going to change overnight. If you're 30, it took you 30 years to get where you are. So it's going to take a little bit to undo it. And so if you just incrementally improve, that's awesome and absolutely worth celebrating.
I want to go back to when you were asking about the empowering questions. There were two things happening that were so spot on. So one was everything was about the other person. Amazing. And everything started, and it's not saying that they all have to start this way. It was all curiosity.
Yeah.
Everything was, I wonder, I wonder, I wonder. And there was something, I actually talked to Lori about this on the Careering podcast, how we look at, whether it's been socialized, which it has been, but just women having to be, I can't stand the phrase superwoman for women. It drives me nuts. I can't stand it.
Right.
So I'm like, let's flip it and be a woman who wonders instead of Wonder Woman. Like, let's just shift
Oh,
gears. And everything you said leans into that, because there's oftentimes when I say that to people, depending on the client or the person, they look at it almost like it's childish. Like, to be a woman who
mm,
wonders, I'm going to stare at this, I'm going to stare at the clouds. I can't do that. But what
mm.
you just said was the point of what I was saying. Be a woman who wonders about outside, because we have so much self-consciousness going on and our minds hijacked and we start being so critical. And so you talking about the taking ourselves so seriously, and segueing back about the humor, can you touch upon, you specifically work with women and
Yes.
underrepresented populations in the workforce, right?
Yep. Yep.
And I would just love to hear, do you notice that your target audience has a tendency to downplay themselves? Like when we talk about celebrations and all that, do they have a tendency to kind of just hook into that sense of, yeah, but, so that they can't propel forward in some way?
Yes, very much so. In fact, I'm a huge fan of this book titled "Playing Big" by Tara Moore, and
Yes.
in it she talks about the good student habits, the good student model, the good student. I don't know what it is. Basically, being a good student,
Yes.
and it's so evident in almost everybody I work with. They wind up wanting to do things perfectly, and a lot of it's that perfect thing behind the scenes. I want to make sure that my knowledge is perfect, my analysis is perfect, my script is perfect, my communication is perfect, and such a hard time at actually accepting, hey, I'm good enough, I'm doing a great job, or I'm making forward progress. And to your point about the Wonder Woman, oh my gosh, I love that. I love a woman who wonders, not Wonder Woman. Yes. And I think that when you're younger in your career, a lot of the people that I'm working with now, this is the pivot from before. I was working with a lot of heads of tech companies and finance and working with them on stage. Now I'm working with people who, by design, who are younger in their careers, trying to get more voices to speak up, share their ideas, get up, move up the ladder. And in that group, there is this need to be like, I need to be serious. I need to be taken seriously. I need to be perfect. I can't be celebrating my successes, or I can't wonder. And yes, you can. Yes, you can wonder. In fact, not only can you, that is what's going to enable you to move up the ladder. And maybe the wondering does take on more of a professional slant at first. Like, I wonder how this budget is going to help us meet our goals. Or I wonder how many people we need to get on board before we can have consensus to move forward this idea. Like, it doesn't have to be, I wonder what tie they're wearing, or I wonder what,
Right.
coffee they're drinking. But I think there's so much value there. And it's even more important when you're earlier in your career, or you are not the majority in the room. We talk about the onlys, the only woman, the only person in their 20s, the only person of color, the only person who's non-binary, the only whatever. And that's even more like, that's the time when you should be wondering and connecting and really speaking out, versus trying to get perfect and have everything be spot on, or have that good student habit come up.
Yes. And I love the idea of just shifting the wonder, and so much about the I wonder. So if people who are listening, so if you're listening and you just run with I wonder as a sentence stem before a talk, if that was the only thing you did, in addition to preparing, of course, I feel like they would nail it. Like it would literally shift their consciousness, because they're looking out versus in. And
Yeah.
there was so much empathy when you first
Yeah.
used your example about, I wonder how this affects new parents. You're,
Yeah.
you're inevitably having this interconnectedness within, let's say, for example, the organization with interdependence. It de-silos everything. You start looking at people as humans.
Yeah.
It's just such a beautiful and such a simple way that often I think goes overlooked. The idea of
Yeah.
I wonder.
I think it's so important to work. I think it's so important in our communities and our world. If we could just get to a place of this is my idea, this is my belief, this is my standpoint, fine, have that. That's important. But wonder how that idea can be implemented with someone else's idea, or how we can come up with common ground, or whatever it may be. And that is in your on your team, in your company, in your community, anywhere you are.
Yes, and it's curiosity and it's collaboration and it's connection, and it reminds you that we are all part of something so much bigger, so it silences ego. It humbles us. There's so much to that. I just thank you so much for just shooting that out, because there oftentimes we look past statements like that. That statement alone has the potential to bring all of that together.
I want to repeat what you said, Christy, that we are part of something bigger. And this isn't from like a religious or spiritual sense. This is the idea that there's a big world out there. So when you can be externally focused, you're less likely to be that I'm so critical of myself. It's like, no, I'm part of this ecosystem. I'm part of this community.
Yes.
There's something else more than just me and my ideas. And that's so humbling in a positive way.
So you saying that too makes me think, like, we always think of like that boastful, arrogant person who comes in and is speaking at us or whatever. The flip side of the same coin, like, we think that's a narcissist, but the flip side of the same coin is the person who's super insecure and self-critical, because then everything's about them. So
Totally.
can you speak
Yes, that's
to that?
irony. Yes, exactly. How funny. Like the last thing I want is for it to be about me, but I'm making it about me. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's so. And then the one thing you said too about the onlys, the idea
Mm,
of the onlys, one exercise, and I must have heard this somewhere along the way. I didn't make it up, but I love it. Is whenever you're feeling and any of the disruptive feelings that aren't going to allow you to be grounded and be focused, if you're speaking to someone or about to speak to someone who brings stuff up, triggers something in you, right? Or you're about to do a podcast or interview and you've never met the host and you're like, ah, write 10 things that you guys have in common so that it
mm.
humanizes. So if you're talking to a boss, you're like, oh my, there's a power differential. And you can say, oh, well, she's a mom and she's the youngest. And okay, this kind of, whew.
I love that.
Any
I
little
have,
hacks like that?
I think that's a great one. I do think that going, not to beat a dead horse, but going back to the questions, that they're not as easy as they sound. So actually crafting a couple questions out in advance. I'm not a believer in scripting. I think it doesn't work. There's a million reasons why I don't like it. But if you are going to script something, script the beginning and end, but also those powerful questions, because even the questions I was giving you, they're fine, but there are better questions we could ask. And often what happens is we ask a closed-ended question. I think we should move to a hybrid approach for work styles. People should choose if they want to work from home or work at work. And then the next question is, how does that sound? Well, they might tell you how they think it sounds, but it might be like fine. So if instead you say, what are the pros and cons of that approach? Or let's take it one at a time. What do you think the benefits are of a hybrid approach? And then what are the challenges? And so crafting your questions in advance helps you, first of all, again, to get in that external headspace of like, how does this land on them? It helps you bring it to like, this is bigger than me. This is bigger than like how I share this information. And it helps you ask the question in a way that really elicits conversation and a response versus just sounds fine, or it's good, or I'm fine. So there's that. But I do want to go back to your idea, the 10 things in common. I think that's really just a very grounding
Yeah,
exercise.
it is. And especially, I mean, I was talking about power differential, but also when you were talking about the onlys, if you're the only woman, if you're the only minority, if you're the only, only one who's under 30, just to be able to go, okay, I might be the only one, but what do we have in common? It just, there
Yes.
is there's a sense, it's not a power over, it doesn't shift the power, it just almost neutralizes it internally.
Humanizes.
Yes,
Yeah,
and humanizes it.
absolutely.
Totally.
There is a little hack trick, and I'm curious how this will play out, but uh, there's a hack around people who have a hard time inserting pauses. So let's say you have to present for 4 minutes. You have to give an update on what's happening. It's a quarterly business review or something. And you do want to have pauses in there so you're not just breathless. Some of it, the people I work with, they wind up talking like this because they're talking so fast and they're never taking a breath. You're like, okay, you need to pause or you need to take a breath. So this one woman I work with gets super nervous and gets that high squeaky voice the longer she talks. So we have a strategy where she now has a ball. Originally, before she had a ball, I had her take a piece of paper and just crumple it up and create a ball. And so she'd hold it underneath out of camera view, and she'd say one or two sentences, and there's a natural break. She even put it down in her, she actually has a script for a good reason, but she put a slash mark, and that would indicate that she would pass the ball to the other hand. And that was to remind her to take a break, take a beat, take a breath. And then she'd say the next little bit about her, she orients people. So it's like an orientation thing that she has to do the same every time. So she does the next one or two sentences, and then she, under the camera view, passes it back. And she said it's helped her for everything because she's now pausing. She's sitting up more. She's younger and she was prone to doing it this way. She's sitting up more so that she can have access to this ball. And she said she was such a fidgeter before, and now it's this intentional thing she can do to control her fidgeting too. So that's sort of a silly one, but for this woman, I actually coined it the Ashley method because she and I together did this, and she raves about it, and she continues to do it. Her name's Ashley.
I love the Ashley method. And I don't think there's still, I mean, so, because here's the thing, the easier and the simpler, we jump past that. Like, it needs to be complex to be effective. And that's just such BS. I mean,
Okay.
I wear ankle weights sometimes just to
Smart.
really ground me down.
Yeah.
And we're not going to be off of Zoom or off of whatever your platform of choice is anytime soon. So
Right.
doing something below, I heard it like the Zoom meridian line where no one can see it. You can just figure out what works for you, whether it's wearing ankle weights, putting a weighted blanket on your legs, just to,
Yeah.
again, to remind you to ground down and not stay
Mhm.
here, right?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
so huge. I love the idea of the little small hacks, the balls, the
Right.
stress balls, whatever it is, the
Right.
pausing, the
Mhm.
shifting. And the one thing too is that it's not just for professional presenting hacks.
Yeah,
If you're strengthening a muscle, you're strengthening a muscle, right? So it's
exactly.
going to be your whole life that gets
It's so true.
affected.
And for those people who have the tight voice or have a hard time breathing, I'll also talk about, and it's some of us have a easier time than others, but holding your hand on your belly, so similar to the grounding of your legs, so that you're recognizing I'm bringing in more of my body to this than just being a talking head from my voice, so that I'm actually finding my power from my core, finding my power from literally the core of myself versus just this little high squeaky voice.
Yes, all of those. I mean, you're going to take something from this, whoever's
Exactly.
listening to this, because there are so many little ones that you can mix and match and try out
Yes.
for size. I have a theory, and I want some of your perspective on this.
Right.
So we're wearing masks,
Mm-hmm.
and I found that eye contact prior to COVID was horrible. Let's just say, especially for younger generations who are digital natives, like and I don't want to say it's their fault, it's they're born looking down. So eye contact
Mm-hmm.
is unnerving, right?
Yeah.
Because you're present, you feel maybe a little exposed. But with the masks, all
Mm,
we have is eye contact,
yes.
right? So I was like, I wonder if they're going to see eye contact going up
Ah,
because of the masks. What's your thought?
I love that theory. I have not thought about that. I've not heard that. This is your theory that I love. And it makes so much sense to me. I mean, we are smiling with our eyes. You're in those situations and where you're on the street or in the grocery store or wherever it is, and you have to communicate with your eyes. And we've been doing this, but I think you're right. I really hope you're right that kids or millennials or Gen Z or whatever it is, anyone who has not necessarily been prioritizing eye contact to the extent that they did before the pandemic, I really hope that they continue that. That's cool. Or at least they get used to having eyes on them. Like to your
Yeah.
point, when you're sitting there with your screen the whole time, we do an exercise of when we were in person where you'd sit with another person and for 2 minutes you'd look at each other like knee to knee, look at each other. Sometimes it was only 1 minute and not say a word, not look away. Because it's incredibly unnerving having eyes on you, but it's also incredibly connecting, not for 2 minutes, but like that was the point. It was like, let's stretch this out.
Yeah.
And I would love it if people were now more comfortable
Mhm.
being seen so
Yes.
that they can continue to do so when the masks come off. Great. That's cool.
We'll see. And because then on the flip of that, with
Yeah.
Zoom,
Yeah.
nobody knows where to look. So there's
Yep.
no, so maybe it'll just neutralize. Who the heck knows? But I like to
That's
think
true.
that it will enhance it, and it
Yeah.
will allow us to be more comfortable being present. Because what you just said, it's like we're terrified of being seen, yet everybody wants to feel seen. It's in our wiring. So it's
Yes,
the super paradox. It just
it
doesn't
is
make any sense.
totally. Yeah.
But you
Yeah.
you did say one thing. So I want to you said something I heard when you were on Lori's podcast for careering, and you just brushed upon the generations, and I would love to I would love you just to share that insight again, because I loved hearing it. And then
Yeah.
we're going to jump into letting everybody know about your book that's coming out in the
Yeah.
fall.
Yeah.
So awesome. um so you were talking about, I love the idea of multi-generational workplace, and
Mhm.
instead of these generational silos, internal silos, understanding how to pull out the strengths of not just each individual, but specifically there's stereotypes for each generation
Yeah.
for good reason, and people break them, sure, but
Yeah.
how to find the strengths so that people can be working in more harmony within an organization when they have multi-generational, which everybody does,
Yeah.
employees. Can you speak to that? Just your share more of that insight with people.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to a lot of what we're talking about being curious. Like, how can I leverage the best of each generation to come together to make a better team, a better product, a better company? And yes, we can take on stereotypes, but if it's that you have someone who is on the podcast, we talked about someone who's coming back to work after having taken a break off to parent children. And you have that person who has wisdom, they have perspective, they have experienced multitasking and problem solving and negotiations with their family life. And they can bring some perspective or just some experience to the situation versus someone who's more of a digital native. They know how to do it, they can adapt, they can blah blah blah, they can help that. But also there's the whole idea of like millennials are mostly malaligned. There's so many great things about every generation, but the thing I love about millennials is their sense of purpose and sense of belonging and sense of culture. So let's figure out how we can tie those things together, because we can find that parents coming back to work, they may just be go, 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 get it done, because that's how I've been working with my family and I want to get it done at work so I can get back to my family. But combine that with someone who has a real big need to create the environment at work that's really fulfilling for people and purpose, with combining it with someone who is even younger perhaps and like that real digital native, so adept at coding or whatever it may be. And how can we leverage the best of each of those generations or stereotypes or whatever it is to collaborate? And like whatever deficiency I have, let's pair up with somebody so that we together are stronger.
It's so, this conversation, we have to have you back to just talk about
Yeah.
this topic. It is so huge. It's a game changer for the workforce to be able to look at it from this perspective, right? Because if we're so in our way, And I mean, because how many times do you hear millennials are entitled, millennials? I'm so sick of hearing that, because there have been many millennials I've met who've completely squashed that, and they forget
Yes.
that. Why are they entitled? What generation raised millennials? Like,
Right.
you gotta go
Right.
back a little. I mean, come on. It's so ridiculous. It's just pointing out. That's,
Yes.
by the way, that's not the out that Hope and I are talking about. When we say go out, we're not saying blame others. But the idea of so a total segue to your book now, because that idea of, if we're self-aware from everything we talked about up until this point, if we're self-aware enough to hone our speaking ability so we feel more confident to speak up, and we share with our coach, if we have one, insecurities we may have behind the
Yeah.
scenes, then we're more willing to not just have empathy for someone else, but to listen to someone else because we feel seen and heard,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So before we jump to your book, I would love you just to share one or two maybe common thoughts or themes that you feel clients come to you that are in the closet. They feel like they're the only ones that have these. And when they come out of the closet in regards to their fears of speaking, they feel like, oh, okay. Do you have anything?
Yes, well, just yesterday, I had a woman come in. She actually, we met in person. It was so exciting. And she is in charge of a brand, like a very big brand that probably everyone watching knows. And I won't get specific, but let's just say that she is in charge of Prius cars, right? So something that people know, and she's in charge of like the manufacturing, she's in charge of the distribution, the marketing, the budget, the hiring, everything about this item. Well, she was asked to speak to a big group and its other brands. So maybe there's Tesla and there's Mercedes and there's this. And she has gone down this rabbit hole of compare and despair. Well, we're not as fancy as the Teslas, or we're not as this as this. And like, she can't get out of her own way. And I was like, let's just pretend like you're the only one. You're the only one talking right now. And this is a little different than what we talked about earlier, where here you are wondering about the listeners. What have you learned? What do you do? Like, don't compare yourself, because you are unique. You are not a Tesla and you are not a Mercedes. You are the Prius, and that fits a very specific need. You know everything about it. You know it inside and out. You focus on what you know. And the second she does, she shines, she lights up, she gets excited, she's really passionate about this product. And it's just so natural for us to get clouded by other things that frankly we have no control over. We don't know how the listeners are going to react. If they want to hear from Mercedes, they're going to hear from Mercedes, but plenty of other people are going to want to hear from the more affordable version, or from the more whatever version, reliable version, whatever it may be. So that compare and despair thing is pretty universal. And I do think people, it may feel obvious to you and me or many of us, but I do think that people are always surprised when I tell them that comes out all the time. So there's that one. The other thing that happened this week, it's funny because I was like, what are some things that are in the closet? This guy asked me, I do these masterminds, which are really fun. And it's people from different industries and different roles and different ages and different geographies. It is this melting pot of awesomeness. And in the chat, I said, okay, so next week we're going to talk about complications. What are some complications that arise? And this guy writes in the chat, he says, when you don't want to speak up or present because you're going to be made fun of. And I was like, okay, I know we said we're going to talk about that next week, but I have to talk about this right now. Like, let's hear, how are you made fun of? Like, I want to understand how you're being made fun of. He's like, I'm not. I was like, oh, well, can you tell me more about your complication? He's like, well, no, I'm worried I'm going to be. And I said, oh, well, why would you be? And he's like, well, I don't know. They just might not think that I know what I'm talking about. And he's like, I was asked to do this conference, but I mean, I didn't want to do it because what if they make fun of me? And I was like, well, what is this conference? And he's like, oh, it's a great conference. It's like, have you watched other presenters? Yeah. Are they made fun of? No. Do people doubt them? No. So you create this whole story in your head of, I mean, he was convinced if he went up there, they would call him out. And whether that's imposter syndrome or it's fears or whatever we want to talk about, he was genuinely shocked when we went down that path of, so nobody has ever been made fun of at this conference. So speaker has been outed. So they've actually gotten either positive reactions or neutral reactions. But for whatever reason, he was convinced that he would be the one that would be called out, and genuinely shocked that other people felt that way too.
And just to be clear, you're talking about adults.
Yes.
I just
Yes.
want to be clear, because we're not ever really off the playground, right? Like the fears that are there, the fears that are there, and we may be able to work with coaches to get past it.
Yeah.
But that's really part of our job too, is to unpack it so that you can figure out specifically with him, if he were going to come to you alone, like, well, do you want to unpack it? Like, let's figure out, so that you can reframe it and shift it and demystify. Like sometimes you need that person who's grounding it, like, okay, has anyone in the conference ever been made fun of? We get into such a tizzy that it's so helpful. So I love you being able to become like the voice of reason there, right? Because we can get hijacked by that insecure inner critic, whatever you want to call it, gremlin voice. So I love you. Thank you for sharing that about both. And compare and despair. It's like, oh my gosh, it's a horrifically beautiful phrase. So we all do it to a degree. And I just want to say that, like, for people who are listening, you being able to share that just ideally sheds light on, oh my gosh, there's other people that feel that way too, that are adults. Like, because we can oftentimes make ourselves like, it's such an immature thought, or I should be older, mentally mature to think about it differently.
Well, and Christy, I feel these things all the time too. So it's not, yes, oh, fine, I can coach people out of it, but it doesn't mean that I'm not comparing and despairing. And whether that's from a work perspective or a home perspective or a friend's perspective or whatever it may be, both of those things happen where it's like this irrational belief of some fear of something happening that has no bearing in reality, or compare and despair happens all the time to all of us.
To all of us. And it's so true. It doesn't mean just because you're a coach or you're a therapist or in the mental health, whatever. I mean, that's slightly off of what you do, but it doesn't mean that we don't feel that. We just have the tools to help us come down, ideally, to self-coach if we choose to use that. So I love, thank you so much for sharing those. And so your book is coming out in the fall. I'm excited to talk about that, to end the episode. So it's called Speak Up, Dammit, and it's coming out in October 2021. So can you just share who's it for, why they should buy it, and anything else you want to share about it?
Yes, Speak Up, Dammit, how to quiet your fears, polish your presence, and share your voice. And it's very exercise driven. So a lot of these things that we're talking about, even some of the fears of this guy in the conference, I have them played out to the end. So, what's the worst thing that would happen? All right, they make fun of me. All right, and what's the worst thing that happens then? I cry on stage, or I sweat on stage, or I get so embarrassed. And what happens next? And what happens next? What happens next? And, I get fired. And let's play it out and either realize, okay, that's actually not really realistic. That's not going to happen. Or, okay, even if it all did happen, I would get up again the next day and I could rebuild. So there's that fear piece of exercises for that. But a lot of it really is more exercises for how to share your voice effectively, whether it's at work. A lot of the examples, in fact, most of the examples are work examples, but I've had advanced readers read it who are not working. Either they're college students now, or they are not, they're older, but they stay at home for whatever reason. And they're like, oh my gosh, this exercise helps me so much, whether it's for the PTA, the neighbor negotiation, talking to my kids, talking to my professor. So a lot of it's around anything of the tangible, of the eye contact, the energy, the pause, so much about the pause. And then about external focus, thinking about your listeners, thinking about how to be persuasive, and how to overcome the complications that arise. So it's very accessible. Really, anyone can do it. A lot of people will hopefully do it just so to improve their skills at home. But I also really would love to see people pairing up or joining groups. It could be the ones that I'm facilitating or the ones that you do on your own to challenge each other to continue to improve.
I love the idea of having it be in a group or with a pair. There's an inherent sense of accountability and support that's within that. And and you're speaking out loud. So you're able to practice. So there's so
Yeah.
much to that. And the book sounds so fantastic. And just from, if anybody hasn't checked you out already, the YouTube videos that you offer are so great. They're so short, sweet. They're exactly, you are who you are, right? Like the way you're showing up now is the way you're showing up when you're on the YouTube videos, which is so refreshing, because sometimes there's a little bit of a misalign when you speak to people. And if you haven't checked out Hope's YouTube, we're going to put a link in the notes below, but definitely check them out. They're short and sweet. And like we said about the pause, which is so huge, because, and you can unpack a whole other episode on our fear of silence. Like there's so much to that. The post-it that I referenced before is definitely worth checking out. I may actually put a direct link to that one, and then because it's so helpful, and it's just, it grounds you down. So when people want to learn more about you and the work you do, where can they go, Hope?
Yeah, so I plan just 2 social media sites on Instagram and LinkedIn, but then I also have my website where it has the masterminds and more information at hopetimberlake.com, basically my name.com. And I don't know, I do newsletters a couple times a month. Would love to share these tips. They have little videos, little short reminders of what we're doing, and you could sign up on my website. And I appreciate any kind of interaction. Like it's funny when you see people who are quote unquote experts in their field, and you think like, oh, that person knows so much, they wouldn't want to hear from me. And I don't know, I can't speak for other people, but I love it when people reach out and they say, I'm having this challenge, or hey, I had this success, or I love this video, or actually that video quality was not good and I need to tell you why. And that conversation that I have with people, most of whom I don't know, it's so fun. So all of that, I encourage any kind of feedback, questions, tips, whatever.
And it's so not surprising. That's what you exude. So definitely take Hope up on that. And we will be having you back, especially once we get closer, or once the book comes out, because there are so many things within what you just shared that we could have a whole conversation about. So thank you so much for being a part of the Closet series. We loved having you.
I love being in the closet with you.